short life. His health was so fragile that there were periods of time when he was confined to bed, unable to work. Between bouts of illness, he would have to push himself to put in extra hours at various jobs in order to make ends meet. After coming to Christ at age 27, Thomas found great comfort in the Scriptures and the fact that God was faithful to be his strength in time of illness and weakness and to provide his needs. Lamentations chapter 3, verses 22 and 23 was one of his favorite scriptures. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. While away from home on a mission trip, Thomas often wrote to one of his good friends, William Runyon, a relatively unknown musician. Several poems were exchanged in these letters. Runyon found one of William's poems so moving that he decided to compose a musical score to accompany the lyrics. Great is thy faithfulness was published in 1923. I would have to ask Pam and Durain if they heard that for the first time in 1923. Just kidding. I didn't want to say one of y'all's names. But for several years, the hymn got very little recognition until it was discovered by a Moody Bible Institute professor who loved it so much and requested it sung so often at chapel services that the song became the unofficial theme song of the college. It was not until 1945 when George Beverly Shea began to sing Great is Thy Faithfulness at the Billy Graham Evangelistic Crusades, and the hymn was heard around the world. Thomas Chisholm died in 1960 at age 94, and during his lifetime, he wrote more than 1,200 poems and hymns, including Oh, to Be Like Thee and Living for Jesus. So let's sing that song together. Great is thy faithfulness.
Shadow of turning with thee, thou changest not, thy compassions they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Summer and winter and springtime and harvest, sun, moon, and stars and their courses above, join with all nature and manifold witness to thy great faithfulness, mercy, and love. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth, thine own dear presence to cheer and to guide, strength for today and bright hope for Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me.
Chisholm wrote that last part, all that I needed, thy hand provided. He didn't say all that I wanted, thy hands provided. God gives us exactly what we need and when we need that. Judges chapter 8 is our text this evening, and as you're turning there, a couple of announcements as far as sermon series that are coming up. So starting on Sunday morning, we're going to start a series through the book of Philippians called Joyful Life, and that be up there on the screen. Joyful Life, this picture of a kid jumping into puddles. That's a joyful life. I was not a puddle jumper at all, but the kids who do just have a big old smile on their face. But start through Philippians, Joyful Life, and Sunday nights, we are going to tackle Psalm chapter 119, and it's going to be called The Word Alive. And so almost, and we'll get into this Sunday night, almost every single verse in Psalm 119 has a synonym of the Word of God. I think all but 5 has that. And so we'll be looking in each section that's divided by 8. In the Hebrew alphabet is how it's done. And so we'll take each section of 8 each night. So it'll probably take 6-8 months plus, somewhere around there, to get through Psalm 119. But those are the 2 that are coming up. And then Philippians is a short book. And so pray with me. I think the Lord wants us to go through the book of Genesis after that. And so that's going to be a while getting through that book. I love the book of Genesis. And so a lot of meat there, a lot of history there. And so that's what's coming up. Judges chapter 8. But tonight we are going to finish the life of Gideon. We started the first part a couple of weeks ago, talking about Gideon the finisher. And won't spoil much here, but the idea is this, that we must finish well. It's not about how you start, it's about how you finish. I used to go golfing with my dad as a little kid, and I would grab, I was like his caddy type of thing. I would grab his golf clubs. I would move the flag for him when it's time to putt. I will, all these kinds of things, clean his golf clubs, and just him, his friends would go. Well, the older I got, I drove the cart, and then I played some golf with them. But I always heard all of my dad's golfing friends say this: it's not how you drive, it's how you arrive. It's not about how far you can hit the ball on the first shot. Some guys can just bulldoze the ball 400 plus yards, seems like. And then they're like, oh, look at me. I drove way past you. Me and some other guys were in the golfing team in high school. And so me and three others. And 2, forgive my terminology, but 2 old guys were our golf coaches. I mean old guys. And so we would all go golfing with them. So for practice, and we were teeing off. All of us could outdrive them by a long shot. I mean, just our ball would just be way down the golf course before these guys. And they will look at us with a smile on their face. And I don't think we hardly, I never beat them. Only one of the guys ever beat them that year. Because it's not about how you start, it's about how you finish the race, finish the course. So we must finish well. 2 Timothy chapter 4, Paul says this at the end of his life, chapter 4, verses 7 through 9. Paul says this, I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day, and not to me only, but to all them also that love his appearing. Do thy diligence to come shortly unto me. So I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. He finished well. Now verse 28. We looked at a couple of weeks ago, we found out that Gideon is not exactly finishing his course well. He's not exactly finishing as the faithful man, faith-filled Christian that he ought to have been. Verse 28 of Judges chapter 8. Thus was Midian subdued under the children of Israel, so that they lifted up their heads no more. And the country was in quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon. It's interesting how the Bible puts that not once Gideon took care of them, they weren't going to try it again. They would not lift up their heads. They were in quietness and peace for 40 years, as long as Gideon was alive. Here's a couple of thoughts from that verse. When God fights your battles, he always finishes with a victory. When is there defeat in our lives? When we decide to try to fight the battle on our own. Not when we say, God, the battle is yours. The battle is in your hands. I want you to fight for me. Fight my battles. It's God will always finish with the victory. His victory will always result in completion. He will always get the job done. Just like there, he used Gideon to defeat the Midianites, and there were no more. It was done. His victory will always result in completion. But the next part, his victory will always result in peace. When there is victory over sin, when there's victory in our lives, then there is peace. He had a quietness, the Bible says, for 40 years in the days of Gideon. Peace. Let's look at that word for a few minutes tonight. Make sure that we find our peace in God and nothing else. There's so many people and so many places, even Christians, who are trying to fill that void and trying to find that peace someplace else. They're trying to either use money or even religion or sex or drugs or alcohol or anything else, work for that matter. They're trying to fill that void and try to find that peace. But if we don't find our peace in God, then there is really no peace. It cannot be found. Here's a few verses in regards to peace. John chapter 14 and verse number 27. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. He says, it's not the world that gives peace. Peace comes through and from me. John chapter 16, verse number 33. These things I have spoken unto you, that in me ye might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. In me you will have peace. Isaiah chapter 26 and verse number 3. Isaiah the prophet writes this, thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on money, because he trusts in money. No. Whose mind is stayed on whom? On thee, on God. Because he trusts in God. Colossians chapter 3. Verse number 15, Paul writes this, and let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to the which also you are called in one body, and be ye thankful. Let the peace of God rule in your hearts. There's something I believe that Gideon was missing at the end of his life. And I believe he is trying to find more peace and more joy, but from the wrong things, from the wrong areas. Gideon may seem like a success, but in some ways, I would say in the many ways, he was a failure. We look at Gideon's life and we think, wow, look at Gideon. He defeated the Midianites. Look at the what he did with the 400 men. But at the end of his life, we see that it did not end in success. It ended in failure. As we get into chapter 9, in his son, I'm skipping a little bit, in his son, we will see exactly just how bad of an example he was. Now, verses 29 and 30. And Zerubbabel, the son of Joash, went and dwelt in his own house. And Gideon had 70 sons of his body begotten. He 70 sons. That is a lot of baseball teams and basketball teams. That's a lot of men, but he had many wives. We see this thought as we closing of Gideon's life. Again, I want to mention this. It's mentioned several times that Jerubbaal is another name for Gideon. I mentioned that before, and you will also see that. So when you see that name, it's referring to Gideon. And a commentator said this: a harem was not only a reflection of a man's inability to control his sexual lust, and we see that in Gideon's life, his inability to control that lust. It was also a way for him to proudly express his wealth by saying, look at all the wives and children I can support. Remember how much we said he asked for and the people he gave him. It wasn't exactly like now he's a poor man that he once was. Remember when he said, I am the least of the tribes, the least of the family, and I'm a nobody. Now he is a somebody. May we never forget where we came from, and may we never let fame and prosperity get to our heads and to our ego. The Old Testament never directly condemns polygamy through the New Testament, though the New Testament does in Matthew and 1 Timothy. The Old Testament shows the bitter fruit of such. There isn't a character in the Old Testament that had multiple wives that didn't have trouble. I am not saying that the more wives you have, the more trouble you have. What I'm saying is that when you are living in such a lifestyle, that there is consequences to that lust, consequences to that. The stories of polygamous families in the Old Testament, such as Jacob and David, are the stories of conflict and crisis. There's always that conflict that is there as we look at it. Even eventually we'll preach to the book of 1 Samuel. But 1 Samuel chapter 1, what is Samuel's dad's name? It left me. Samuel's dad. Oh no, I must look. Oh my goodness. Forgive me while I look up some information. Elkanah. I could only think of Eleanor, and that was not the right name. That Elkanah, he had 2 wives, Hannah and Peninnah, and there was conflict and crisis there. It was not a harmonious thing. So when we divert out of God's plans, then we are asking for conflict and crisis in our lives. I had an old Sunday school teacher mention this next phrase. It's obviously not original with me. And he was talking about different things in our lives. And we as kids will look at something and say to our parents or to our pastor, youth pastor, Sunday school teachers, and we would say something like this: well, you said it was wrong, but what's wrong with this? Or what's wrong with that? He would say something like this: Stop always asking what's wrong with this or that, and start asking what is right with this or with that. And that's the idea, that sometimes we need to ask what's right with my decision, not what's wrong with my decision. I can do what I want to do. What's wrong with that? But we should say, but what's right with it? There's I'll probably mess up this acrostic, but the words that we speak, if it's true, if it's helpful, if it's, what's I? I'll get back to that. I, needful, or kind, then don't say it. Well, there's nothing wrong with what I said. Is it one of those 4 or 5 things? Well, not really, but there's nothing wrong with what I said. And it's not about what's wrong, it's about what is right with what your decisions are. The Gideon we see at the inspirational. That's the I in what I was trying to think of. The Gideon we see at the end of his life is not the same as the faithless man in the beginning. So in the very beginning, when he is fearful, he is asking God for a sign here, a sign there, a sign here, a sign, sign, sign. And God proves himself, and proves himself. This is not the same scared Gideon that we see in the beginning, nor is it the same as the faithful man in the middle of his life. This is a third type of Gideon that we see. He goes from fearful to faithful, and now he is at the end of his life where he will not finish well. Gideon's life teaches us that it is easy to let prosperity and victories to have a stronghold in our lives in a negative way. Now, although there are victories, and Gideon had them, although there are prosperities, and Gideon had them, if we are not careful, we can allow that to be a stronghold in our lives in a negative way and not a positive way. God did not give us the victories and prosperity for us to bow down to those things. He gave us those things so that we can worship and glorify Him. Verses 31 through 32. And his concubine that was in Shechem, she also bare him a son, whose name he called Abimelech. He must have had a concubine in several places, because it didn't say, and his concubine bare him a son. It was the one that was in Shechem, which means he probably had one in Shiloh and one in this place and one in that place. But now we're talking about a particular son whose name is Abimelech. And Gideon the son of Joash died in a good old age and was buried in the sepulchre of Joash's father in Ophrah, the Abiezrites. Here's some thoughts from this passage. Number one, Abimelech means my father, a king. Remember when Gideon got done with the war with the Midianites and the Israelites said, hey, what did they want Gideon to be? Their king. Be the king over us. And Gideon said, that's not for me to do. That's God is your king. But what did he name his son? Abimelech, my father, a king. Abimelech didn't name himself that. Gideon named his son that. It seems that although Gideon didn't want to be king, he wanted royalty in his family. Whether or not he intended this to happen, he was almost setting Abimelech up to be the king. And we are going to see in the next few chapters how bad that decision really was. It was not a good decision, naming him that or encouraging him in one way or another to do such things. Through his career, We see Gideon as a man who slipped from great heights of faith to a place of outright apostasy and rebellion against God. We could say this, that Gideon handled adversity better than success. Success, riches, and prominence brought him down. Do you know why God doesn't give us the prosperity that we think we could handle and have? Because he knows we can't handle such prosperity. But if I gave him $5 million, God, I promise you, I would build a new church. I would support missionaries myself. I would do this. And out of God, it would be your money, but God knows our flesh, and we can't handle success as well as we can handle failures. Our head gets big. Our pride kicks in. And Satan becomes the one that we serve because of pride. We must finish well. Whether we start well or not, we must finish well. He didn't start well, then he did well, and then he did not finish well. Well, I didn't start well. I can't finish well. You don't even know my life. Well, I'm a mess. It doesn't matter what you once were. How are you going to finish your life? I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Verses 33 through 35. It came to pass as soon as Gideon was dead. I'm using my mom's Bible tonight. It's interesting. She circled 3 words in this passage, this verse. And it came to pass, the next 3 words, as soon as. It does not say it came to pass eventually as Gideon was dead. So as soon as he died, what happened? The children of Israel turned again and went a whoring after Balaam and made Baal-berith their god. And the children of Israel remembered not the Lord of their God, who had delivered them out of the hands of all their enemies on every side, neither showed they kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, namely Gideon, according to all the kindness which he had showed unto Israel. Lest we forget, I mentioned this in probably our very first message in Judges chapter 1. Don't forget, as we are reading the book of Judges, the people who remembered not and went a whoring after Balaam are those, is that the same generation that fought against the Midianites? No. 40 years have passed. It's a different generation. So it's not like Bernie's out there fighting with the Midianites and then Gideon dies and Bernie says, forget this. It's not that same crowd. It's the next generation that does that. We see this a lot, and I have mentioned this before. What I believe happens is this. I'm going to use him as one generation and me as a next generation, and then my son as the next. So here's Bernie in his generation. He's fighting the Midianites. That's over now. Maybe I was old enough to see my dad fight, to see him go to battle, to see those things and hear about it. But when I'm in my prime, the war is over. So what is happening is that this generation, after there is wars done and there is peace, whether they intend to or not, whether they are actively teaching this or not, some way or another, they are teaching the next generation to trust in the previous generation and not the God of that generation. That as long as we are alive and well, things are going to go well. But once we die off, then there's nobody to follow after. That generation should have taught the younger generation the reason for that victory is not because of Gideon. It's because of God. Boy, y'all have been alive through more presidents than I have. And I would say y'all have been alive through better presidents in some people's perspectives than I have. But I remember I was young when some of these presidents that people liked the most, I was young, and I can remember them saying, boy, if this guy was president again, boy, if this guy was president again, if this guy was president again, boy, things would just go better than what it is now. Our success as a country, our success as a Christian is not based upon a leader or a man. It's based upon God. It doesn't, I'm going to say this tongue in cheek, it doesn't matter who's in the White House. God will always be on the throne. I am not saying just flip a coin and vote for whoever you want to. But what I'm saying is, if Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse is in the White House, God is still God. We still serve him. Where we have difficulties as a country, politically speaking, probably so. But God is still God. Verse number 35. Neither showed they kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, namely Gideon, according to all the goodness which he has showed unto Israel. That's interesting. So as soon as Gideon died, that next generation showed no kindness, did not even like the family of Gideon. Sons, Gideon, and more so the Bible says, Gideon himself. Why is that? Why would the man who saved them out of the clutches and the fist and the grasp of the Midianites, why would he be looked down as being someone not to show kindness to? Well, let me ask you this. Why in this country do people not show kindness to leaders, be it good or bad or whoever, leaders who have done good in the United States? Because they're only following a political party and that's it. These people are only following an agenda and not looking at the big picture itself. Number one, Israel has always based their faith, peace, and victory on man and their leaders, especially in the book of Judges. When this judge dies, there's peace, and then all of a sudden I'm going to serve another God. And then finally God gives them another judge. They trust God again. They believe God. There's victories. There's peace. That judge dies, and then they turn back to a false God. Which means our faith, our peace, and our victories should never be based on a man or a leader. They should never be based on anyone else. We are not successful because of a president. We are not successful because of an economy. We are not successful because of this. It's all because of God. By serving Baal, Israel said, what really matters is money and success. And in this, they follow the example of Gideon in his later years. What did Gideon teach the Israelites the end of his life? Success and wealth is what matters in life. So they said, oh, have you heard this in leadership or in schools, or if you were in a work field, those types of things, that the employees will always do a little bit less than what's expected by the employer. So if the employer's bar is set here, this is perfection, they're always here. And if the employer sets it down here, then they're still going to be down here. That's the idea, right? So that's what's happening to Israel now. Well, he went after money. He went after prosperity. We're going to do the same thing, but it was to the nth degree. They took it farther than what Gideon did. Gideon did not outright serve another god, but he showed them that success is more important than godliness. So who is this Baal Berith? It's the first time that we see this name, this god, in the book of Judges. Baal Berith means Baal of the covenant. Who is the God of covenants to the Israelites? Well, Jehovah. He said, I will make a covenant with my people. But now, who are they claiming as being the God of covenants? Baal. It's no longer God. Sadly, Israel made Baal the God of their covenants. That he's the one we swear upon. He's the one that's promised this. He's the one who will keep us. He is the one who will give us success. He is the one that will get us to point B. If you were God and have done all the things you did for Israel, and then they name a God, a false God, a God of the covenants, you as an individual, how would that make you feel? Oh, no, you didn't. How could you do that? I don't understand it. Us looking back at them, even in Aaron and the golden calf, and he says that this is the God that brought thee out of Egypt. How could you go that far? How can we go that far in our lives as to trust prosperity, success, money, and other things even in our lives? We may not have Baal, the God of our covenants, but how we live sometimes as Christians, that we are trusting in something else besides God to give us victories in our lives. So again, as we finished last message and we started this message, we're going to finish Gideon's life with this thought. We must finish well. There's another judge that we will eventually get to who didn't exactly finish well. I do want to say this. Just because someone doesn't finish well, does that negate all the things that God did through that person? No. No. None of us are perfect by any stretch of the imagination. That does not negate that God still uses imperfect people to show his might and to get the job done. Sometimes there is a particular, I'm not sure if I mentioned this person's name or not, that there is a doctor who is a creationist who I grew up listening to. He had VHSs, 6 or 7, creation and evolution. He did debate, saw him in a live debate. And so he used to teach high school science in public schools. So he had all kind of textbooks. And he is debating the thought or telling people that evolution is just as much a religion as creation is. They're both based upon faith. And so how he taught young people, the videos that he made it so enjoyable to watch that I was just soaking up all of the things about creation and why evolution is not true. And the Bible says this about creation, all those types of things. So he has some other messages as well, but that's all he did pretty much was creation and evolution. The older he got, he began to do things that I do not agree with, like tax evasion, no more Social Security number as like a lot anti-government type of thing. He actually went to jail, as you can imagine that he would. Does that negate the truth of what he preached about creation? Well, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. So sometimes we look at Gideon and say, well, he failed. Everything that he did is false then. I hope that people don't look at our lives and say, boy, he or she failed. I ain't listening to them no more. So let's give grace how we want grace, but let's finish well in our lives. Let's pray to God. Thank you for all you've given us. Thank you for this time tonight that we can come and sing and worship you as we heard about the beginning of the